The water was still, the surface broken only by the slow drift of fallen leaves. Below, visibility was nearly zero. Through the green haze of the sonar screen, a faint outline appeared, a shape too clean, too symmetrical to be just debris. A voice over the radio confirmed what the divers suspected: "We have a vehicle." It was parked at an impossible angle, half buried in silt, hidden for decades beneath layers of mud and time. The only reason it was found now was because a small team of volunteer divers had decided to search this stretch of river, a place investigators had passed over long ago. The lead diver adjusted his mask and began the slow descent. Each meter deeper brought colder water and thicker darkness. The outline became real, the curve of a roof, the glint of chrome, and then, unmistakably, a license plate cloaked in algae. The moment was heavy. Everyone on the surface knew this wasn't just a mechanical find, it was a time capsule from a day almost 30 years ago. A day when someone left home and never came back. Boats shifted position above to keep the line clear as the diver surfaced briefly, confirming the discovery. The words were short, but the weight behind them was immense. "We've found him." For the family waiting on shore, those 4 words ended decades of not knowing. For the divers, it marked the close of a mission that had taken days of planning and hours of cold, meticulous searching. For the investigators, it was the key that could finally unlock a file marked unsolved since the mid-1990s. This is the story of a man who vanished without a trace. And how 3 decades later, strangers with a camera, a boat, and a promise to help brought him home. Michael Chambers was a familiar face in his small Texas town. In 1995, he was in his early 40s, a husband, father, and a man known for his steady work ethic and easygoing nature. He wasn't the kind of person who disappeared without a reason. On the day he vanished, it started like any other. He was last seen driving his pickup truck, an older model, well kept, with a pale blue finish that stood out in a parking lot. Friends recall that he had errands to run, but nothing unusual was on his schedule. He didn't seem worried, and no one remembers him acting differently that week. When he didn't come home, it didn't set off alarms immediately. Sometimes he worked late or went to visit friends, but by the next morning his family knew something was wrong. There were no calls, no sightings, no withdrawals from his bank account. The truck, his constant companion, was missing too. Police opened a missing persons report and began searching his regular routes. They questioned co-workers, friends, and relatives. Every obvious lead, from local hangouts to remote farm roads, turned up nothing. Weeks became months. Tips came in, but each one led to a dead end. A sighting here, a rumor there, but never any physical evidence. Without proof of foul play and with no scene to investigate, the case grew cold. In small communities, unsolved disappearances leave a shadow. People lock their doors a little earlier, glance twice in their mirrors, and trade theories at the diner. For Michael's family, that shadow never lifted. They continued to push for answers, keeping his story alive in the hope that someone somewhere knew more than they were saying. Years later, technology began to catch up to cases like his. Side-scan sonar, once reserved for military or commercial use, became accessible to volunteer search teams. These groups, often made up of former law enforcement, military veterans, and skilled divers, started revisiting cases where vehicles or bodies might be hidden underwater. Waterways that had been cleared decades earlier could now be examined with far greater detail. Michael's name appeared on one such list. The logic was simple. Texas has countless rivers, creeks, and reservoirs. If he and his truck had gone into the water, whether by accident or intentionally, sonar could reveal what the human eye had missed. Still, years of searching by various groups had turned up nothing. There was no confirmed last location, no eyewitness who could point to a specific body of water. It would take time, patience, and a willingness to search places most would consider long shots. That willingness is what brought Adventures with Purpose to the case. By 2025, the volunteer dive team had earned a reputation for solving cold cases that even seasoned investigators had given up on. They had already brought answers to dozens of families, sometimes finding vehicles in spots that had been overlooked for decades. When they arrived in Michael's hometown, it had been almost 30 years since anyone had seen him alive. For his family, the visit from the dive team was both hopeful and nerve-wracking. Hopeful because this might finally be the break they'd waited for. nerve-wracking because after so long, closure might come with painful truths. The search would focus on waterways within a reasonable driving distance from where Michael was last seen. Some had been searched in the 90s, but only with basic equipment and by surface observation. Others had never been searched at all. In these quiet rural stretches, rivers and reservoirs can hide things for decades currents, burying them in silt. Vegetation growing over them and seasonal changes altering the landscape so much that even locals forget what the area once looked like. For the team, the task was straightforward on paper: scan every possible location until they either found something or ran out of places to look. But the reality was hours on the water, scrutinizing sonar screens and making judgment calls on whether a shadow in the mud was worth a dive. What no one realized that morning was how close they were to finally finding the truth. By early 2024, nearly 30 years had passed since Arnel Nagal Narvaiz was last seen. The original police investigation in 1994 had focused on land searches and interviews, but no clear trail had emerged. His disappearance was eventually filed away as a cold case, one of many in California where the leads had simply run out. That is when Adventures with Purpose Op decided to add his name to their growing list of unsolved missing person cases. The group was already known across the United States for locating vehicles underwater and solving cold cases using sonar technology, often in places that had been searched before but with less sophisticated tools. Their approach was deliberate. First, they studied public records and spoke with anyone still familiar with the case. Maps of waterways within driving distance of Arnel's last known location were examined, with particular attention to areas near bridges, boat launches, and roads where an accident could have gone unnoticed. Sacramento County, with its winding rivers, backwater sloughs, and murky channels, presented both opportunity and challenge. The Sutten Slough, a quiet, off-current stretch of water, caught their attention. It was accessible from the main road, but far enough off the beaten path that a vehicle could slip in without immediate detection. The search day began with an early launch. Their boats were outfitted with side-scan sonar, a device that sends acoustic pulses into the water and creates a detailed image of the bottom, unlike a camera. Sonar doesn't need light. It can see through the darkness and silt that makes diving here nearly impossible without guidance. Hours passed with the rhythmic sweep of the sonar arm and the constant watch on the laptop screens. Most returns showed nothing more than rocks, logs, and natural debris. Then one shape stood out. It was rectangular, the proportions matching that of a car. The roofline was slightly visible in the image, but the rest was buried under decades of mud. The team marked the coordinates and decided it was worth a closer look. 2 divers prepared to go in. Even with dry suits, the cold water seeped through in seconds. Visibility was only a few inches. This wasn't a place where you could simply look around. It was all done by feel. The diver's gloved hands traced a smooth curve. The metal was coated in thick algae, but as he moved forward, he found the outline of a windshield. This wasn't just a car-shaped shadow. This was a real vehicle, and it had been here a long time. Once the divers surfaced and confirmed the find, the mood shifted. This wasn't just a vehicle recovery, it was potentially the end to nearly 3 decades of questions. The team notified the Sacramento County Sheriff's Office, who secured the area and arranged for the vehicle to be brought up. Lifting a car from underwater is a slow, methodical process. Straps were secured underneath, the silt clouding the water with every movement. When the crane finally pulled the vehicle above the surface, the damage from years underwater was clear, but so was the license plate, a match to Arnel Nagal Narvaiz's missing vehicle report from July 1994. The discovery wasn't yet a full answer that would come after the contents of the vehicle were carefully examined and the remains inside were confirmed through official forensic testing. But for the first time in 30 years, investigators had physical evidence. For OP, this was another mission completed. For Arnel's family, it was the first step toward closure. The coordinates from the sonar scan marked a quiet bend in the Sutten Slough, just far enough from the main channel to avoid casual boat traffic. When the divers first surfaced and confirmed it was a vehicle, there was no cheering, no celebration, just a silent recognition of what it meant. Everyone knew the next steps would determine whether this was truly the answer to a decades-old mystery or another frustrating dead end. The Sacramento County Sheriff's Office quickly mobilized. Their recovery team, a temporary command post, was set up near the bank, with deputies, forensic technicians, and crime scene investigators all working in a coordinated rhythm. The divers from Adventures with Purpose briefed law enforcement on the location, depth, and condition of the vehicle before stepping aside to let officials take over. The water here was deceptively calm on the surface, but below, years of silt and debris had almost sealed the vehicle in place. It took several attempts to thread heavy-duty straps beneath the frame, each one stirring up clouds of brown water that erased visibility completely. Every movement had to be cautious. The risk of damaging potential evidence was too high. When the crane began its slow lift, the slough seemed to hold its breath. First came the roofline, dripping with moss and waterweed, then the shattered windows, coated with a film of algae. As more of the vehicle emerged, the decades underwater became clear. Rust creeping across every panel, paint dulled to a ghost of its original color. Onlookers, a mix of law enforcement, local news crews, and a few curious residents, stayed silent. For the investigators, it was a rare moment when a case that had lived only in old reports and fading photographs was suddenly in front of them, heavy and real. Once the vehicle was lowered onto the recovery trailer, technicians began a preliminary inspection. The license plate, partially obscured, was carefully cleaned just enough to read the numbers. It matched the plate from Arnel Nagal Narvaiz's 1994 missing person report. Inside, in what was left of the driver's seat, investigators found skeletal remains. Every step from this point had to follow strict protocol. The area around the vehicle was treated as a controlled crime scene. Photographs were taken from multiple angles. Items inside were documented exactly as they were found before removal. Even the mud caked into the floorboards was collected in long submerged cases. Sediment can hold clues about where a vehicle has been or how it entered the water. By the end of the day, the remains were transported to the county coroner's office. Forensic anthropologists would compare dental records and, if needed, conduct DNA testing to confirm the identity. The process could take weeks, but in this case, the condition of the remains and the direct match to the vehicle's registration made officials cautiously optimistic that the mystery was nearly solved. News of the recovery spread quickly. Local media outlets ran brief segments showing the murky water where the vehicle had been found. Online photos from the scene circulated among true crime communities, where amateur sleuths revisited theories they'd debated for years. For Arnel's family, the news was overwhelming. After 30 years of not knowing, they were faced with the reality of a confirmed loss. In interviews, relatives spoke about his kindness, his sense of humor, and the quiet way he went about helping others. Some expressed gratitude to the divers and deputies for not giving up. Others admitted that the confirmation, while devastating, at least brought an end to decades of painful uncertainty. For the team from Adventures with Purpose, it was another reminder of why they do the work. This wasn't just about solving mysteries. It was about restoring names, stories, and dignity to people who had vanished without explanation. Each case carried its own weight, but the sight of a family finally getting an answer made the long hours on the water worth it. The official confirmation came soon after. The remains were identified as Arnel Nagal Narvaiz. He had been missing since July 1, 1994, when he was last seen leaving Stockton for work. How his vehicle ended up in the Sutten Slough was still under review, but investigators believed it was likely a single vehicle accident that went unseen in the remote area. For 30 years, the water had kept its secret. Now it had finally given it back. Once the vehicle and remains were secured, the case shifted from an underwater search to a detailed forensic investigation. Every item removed from the vehicle, from personal belongings to fragments of upholstery, was catalogued, photographed, and placed in evidence bags. Even the mud and silt that had filled the interior were collected, as these could hold microscopic traces that help reconstruct how the vehicle entered the water and how long it had been there. The Sacramento County Sheriff's Office coordinated closely with the County Coroner's Department. One of the first steps was the post-mortem examination of the skeletal remains. Forensic anthropologists began by assessing the condition of the bones, noting weathering patterns consistent with decades of submersion, because DNA can degrade over time in water. Dental records were prioritized. Arnel's dental records, still preserved from the 1990s, were compared to the remains, and the match was definitive. With identification confirmed, investigators turned to the mechanical evidence. The vehicle was examined in a secure facility, away from public view. This process included checking the position of the gear shift, the state of the ignition, and any signs of collision damage, although decades underwater had corroded many components. There were no indications of forced entry, tampering, or damage that would suggest a deliberate act by another party. Attention then shifted to mapping the scene. Using GPS data from the sonar search and photographs from the recovery, investigators reconstructed the vehicle's position before it was lifted. Its resting place nose down, slightly off angle suggested it had entered the water from the nearby bank, likely rolling forward and sinking until it lodged in the silt. To better understand how it could have happened, deputies reviewed historical aerial imagery and maps from 1994. The area near Sutten, Slough had changed significantly over the years. In the mid-90s, the banks were less reinforced, and certain parts of the shoreline were closer to unlit rural roads. A missed turn or loss of control could have easily sent a vehicle into the water unnoticed, especially at night. Witness statements from the original 1994 investigation were revisited. Back then, several people recalled seeing Arnel driving alone the day he vanished. No one reported an altercation or suspicious behavior. Without signs of foul play and with the physical evidence now pointing toward an accident, detectives leaned toward a conclusion of a tragic, undetected crash. Still, they didn't close the file without cross-checking all angles. The sheriff's office consulted with traffic reconstruction specialists, who modeled possible entry paths into the slough. Each scenario, from drifting off the road to swerving to avoid an animal, ended with the same outcome. The vehicle's trajectory matched where it was ultimately found. Publicly, officials were careful with their statements. They confirmed the identification and outlined the likely scenario without speculating on details they couldn't prove. For Arnel's family, this measured approach was appreciated. They had endured decades of uncertainty and rumor. Now they wanted the record to reflect verified facts only. The official conclusion was recorded as an accidental submersion. It was the final chapter in a case that had spanned almost 3 decades, involving multiple agencies, countless volunteer hours, and the persistence of a search team unwilling to let the trail go cold forever. The recovery and investigation didn't just solve one mystery. It also highlighted the importance of revisiting old cases with new technology. Side-scan sonar, once considered specialized and expensive, had proven itself again as a vital tool for law enforcement and civilian search teams alike. For detectives working other cold cases, Arnel's recovery was a reminder that answers can still be found, even after 30 years. When the official identification came in, confirming that the remains belonged to Arnel Nagal Narvaiz, it marked the end of 30 years of uncertainty for his loved ones. For decades, his family had lived in the space between hope and grief, unsure whether he was alive somewhere, unable to come home, or gone forever. In the first few days after the confirmation, emotions shifted constantly. There was gratitude toward the team that had found him, sorrow over the loss, and a kind of quiet relief that the search was finally over. One family member described it as finally having a place to put flowers, a sentiment that resonated deeply with those who understood the unique pain of long-term missing cases. Friends who had known Arnel in the early 1990s came forward to share memories. Some spoke about his steady work ethic and sense of humor, recalling how he'd help neighbors without being asked. Others remembered his love for driving, a detail that made the circumstances of his disappearance feel even more tragic. To them, the image of his car hidden under decades of silt wasn't just a clue. It was a symbol of years stolen by mystery. The local community, too, felt the weight of the news. Stockton and the surrounding towns had seen their share of unsolved cases, but few lingered in public memory as long as Arnel's. His disappearance had been part of neighborhood conversations for years, retold in quiet tones at family gatherings and community events. Now those conversations had an ending, though not the one anyone had hoped for. The Adventures with Purpose team stayed in contact with the family in the weeks after the recovery. For them, solving a case was never just about the technical challenge, it was about standing with the people who had been left behind. They offered raw footage of the search and recovery to the family, giving them the option to see exactly how and where Arnel was found. Some relatives chose to watch, seeking a sense of closure. Others preferred to hold on to the memory of him as he was, not as the divers had found him. Law enforcement also worked to ensure the family was kept informed. Detectives explained each step of the investigation's conclusion, carefully avoiding speculation. They shared the final determination, accidental submersion, along with the reasoning behind it. The family appreciated that nothing was left unexplained, and that the conclusions were based on physical evidence rather than assumption. Public reaction was a mixture of sadness and admiration. The sadness that Arnel's life had ended this way, admiration for the persistence of those who never stopped looking. Local media ran follow-up stories, focusing not just on the mystery but also on the technology and teamwork that made the recovery possible. The hope was that by highlighting the case, other families with missing loved ones might see what was possible, even after decades. For Arnel's relatives, closure didn't mean forgetting. A memorial service was held, attended by family, friends, and members of the search community. Photographs from his life were displayed, him smiling at barbecues, helping on home projects, and standing with relatives during happier times. The tone of the service was bittersweet, mourning what had been lost, while celebrating the man they remembered. In the weeks that followed, some family members began advocating for more resources to be put toward cold case searches, particularly those involving submerged vehicles. They had seen firsthand how quickly a life could vanish into the water, and how long it could take to uncover the truth. For them, sharing Arnel's story was about more than closure. It was about preventing other families from enduring the same decades-long wait. For the volunteers and divers who had found him, the case became a touchstone. It reminded them why they dedicated so much time to work that was often unpaid, physically exhausting, and emotionally draining. Each solved case was a chance to lift a burden from someone's shoulders. In the end, Arnel's family had the one thing they'd been denied for so long: an answer. It wasn't the ending they dreamed of, but it was an ending they could live with, and a reminder that even after 30 years, the truth can still surface. Arnel Nagal Narvaiz's recovery became more than the conclusion of a single missing person case. It became a case study in how persistence, technology, and community cooperation can rewrite the ending of a decades-old mystery. For law enforcement, the case reinforced the value of re-examining cold cases with modern tools. When Arnel went missing in 1994, side-scan sonar wasn't widely available to local agencies, and underwater searches often relied on surface observation and drag lines. These older methods couldn't penetrate the silt and darkness of the Sutten Slough, allowing the vehicle to remain hidden for almost 30 years. Now, departments across the country are taking note of how accessible sonar has become, both for police and for specialized volunteer teams. The recovery also highlighted the importance of civilian expertise. Adventures with Purpose's involvement wasn't a matter of replacing police work, but enhancing it. Their targeted approach, willingness to search locations considered unlikely, and ability to dedicate full days to methodical sweeps gave the case a fresh angle. In many ways, their work bridged the gap between public service and community-led problem solving. In the world of search and recovery, the case served as a training reference. Diving groups and rescue units began discussing how to apply lessons from the Narvaiz recovery, from the pre-search mapping process to the careful handling of evidence underwater. The methodical recovery of the vehicle, preserving both physical and contextual evidence, was used as an example in workshops and training sessions. 30 years is a long time to wait for answers. For the Narvaiz family, the discovery in the quiet waters of the Sutten Slough ended a chapter that had been open since 1994. It didn't bring back the years lost or undo the pain, but it did bring clarity, and with it, the possibility of peace. Arnel's case stands as a reminder that no mystery is truly beyond reach. With the right combination of persistence, technology, and compassion, even the most silent of stories can be told again. This wasn't just about finding a car in the water. It was about restoring a name, returning a loved one, and proving that time does not erase the truth. If you've watched this far, you understand the power of sharing these stories. Every view, every comment, every share increases the chance that another family might get their answer. Somewhere there is another Arnel, a case file gathering dust, a family waiting by the phone, a vehicle resting unseen beneath the surface. So we ask you, share this story, talk about it, keep the memory alive. And if you know of a missing person case in your community, don't assume it's too late, because as we've seen today, sometimes even after decades, the truth still rises. Thank you for watching. We'll see you in the next story. Until then, stay safe, stay curious, and never stop looking.